Welcome to LeapFrogBI Academy course DM100, Project Lifecycle Build. After you spent the time to create components in your LeapFrogBI project, it's then time to build and deploy. In this course, we're going to be focused on those build operations. We're going to build a few different types of objects, and we're also going to touch quickly on lifecycle migration. So to get started, I'm going to move over to another browser window where I've already logged into LeapFrogBI. And let's take a look at our projects. So for this course, we're going to be using the project called CT150. In this project, we've already created components for all of the requirements in the data model that was created in BD110. Now I'm ready to actually build these components and deploy them. The project life cycles that are defined in this project are three. There's a development, test, and production project lifecycle. Because of that, under my deploy section, I have a development, test, and production lifecycle selection. So I can jump over to my deployment area, or development deployment, and let's talk about each of the different builds that are available here. First of all, on the bottom here, we have a component section. And there's a grid that contains every component that's included in this project, along with that component's build status. I have, for example, here, this transform component. It's telling me that the last time this component was modified was on January 12th at this time. This is the last time that component was built, and I have a status. The status can be current, meaning that the build is after the modified date, so I can deploy that component. Not current, meaning that last build is older than the modification date of that component, so it requires a rebuild. Not built means that there is not a build saved for that component. That's either because it's never been built or the build cleanup process has deleted the build. Error just means that there was an error during the build process, and in the event that you do have an error, the details of that error will actually be contained in that build output. All right, so if I want to build components, I can see here that everything is actually current right now because I've already built. But if I want to build a component, I can just simply select that component and click the build button. I'll go ahead and do that here. So I can see right now that this component was last built at 11:30:08, and now that I've rebuilt, I can see that it's now been built at 8:51 p.m. So it's pretty much that simple. If I want to build a single component, I can do that by just clicking build. But most of the time, we're going to want to either make our project current, or we're going to want to do a full rebuild of all components. And to do that, we're going to use these two buttons here, Make Current or Rebuild All. Now, there's a poll process running that is going to pick up the Make Current or Rebuild All request on every 1 minute. So if I click Make Current here, that just schedules a job which is going to be run at the next available time, and it will go through all of my components to make sure that they are all at the current status. If I had selected to rebuild all, then regardless of the status, all of my components would have been rebuilt. All right. Now, in addition to the components, there's also a configuration, and the configuration is what is going to be used to create all of the objects that are required by this project, the databases, the schemas, file groups, files, so on. It would also create the configuration table where all of the centralized configuration will be stored. It will create a variables table where our project statistics will be stored. So this is an important part of the build process. And just like components, I can just click Build Configuration, and that configuration will be built. You'll also notice that this is a DTSX file that's built. I can save that file by just right-clicking, click Save, and I will have an SSIS package that I can then execute. After I have built everything, including my components and configuration, then I'll likely, it would be much more convenient to just download it all as an archive file, and that's all that this Lifecycle archive does. I can click Archive Lifecycle, and LeapFrogBI is going to go out and get all of the current versions of all builds and just put it into a convenient zip file. So I have here a build that's been completed for my development lifecycle. I'm going to just download this. I'm going to save it over in my local drive here. Put it right here. All right, so I have this output. Let's extract it. Okay, so in the extracted folder here, I can see that I have a package that's been created for every component that I have in my project, and additionally I have this configuration package. So that's exactly what your build output should look like. If I execute these packages, starting with the configuration, followed by all of the other packages in the order of precedence, then they will create my data mart and they will maintain my data mart. The next course, DM 110, is going to talk about how we can manage that load precedence with a simple solution. All right, let's jump back over to our browser window here. I want to make a couple more points. Number one is to be able to execute these packages, I have one dependent that I need to create, or dependency. That is this environment variable. The name of this environment variable is LFBI console, followed by the abbreviation that's been assigned for this lifecycle development. And LA is that abbreviation. So I would need to, let me just go ahead and go over here. We can take a look at this. Go to my environment variables here. All right. So this environment variable right here needs to be created. And what this is used for is to enable all the packages to find their configuration. So it's the indirect. It's what's going to allow the package to find the configuration, which is then going to be used to configure the package to do whatever task it was assigned. Now, in the value of this, it's going to be a connection string. And the connection string is simply a string that is going to point us to the database and server instance where our configuration should be stored. Now, LeapFrogBI is going to make sure that this database gets created once again. We don't have to do this ourselves, but the environment variable does need to be in place. So I can see here that I'm using my SQL Server instance here called Text01. This says 2012. My initial catalog is going to be LeapFrogBI Academy, and so on. Okay, so I have that environment variable in place. I have built all my components. I've downloaded that build archive and extracted it. Now, one other thing I want to point out is that these components are portable with a couple of restrictions. First of all, what I mean by portable is that if I build all of my components here in the development lifecycle, I can actually move those components to any environment that I want, as long as the environment has this lifecycle or this environment variable in it, LeapFrogBI console LA. Now, if I had in my project definition assigned a different abbreviation for each of my life cycles, then I would be required to rebuild. So if I had to go to my test life cycle here, and I would have to make all of these current and rebuild them as well. And that's simply because each component is looking for a specific environment variable to find its configuration. The other restriction is that if I have placed schema definitions within any of my connections that are different between life cycles, then that would also require a different build for each of those life cycles. Generally speaking, those are not the case. So typically you only need to build in one life cycle. Doesn't matter which one, they'll all point to the same environment variable. And then you will simply build your configuration for each life cycle. And then that configuration will make sure that all of that centralized configuration information is correct for the selected life cycle. Okay, that's about all there is to the build process. Let's shift gears here for a moment and talk about lifecycle migrations and change management. So to do that, I'm going to pull up a blog post here that I'd like to refer you to. In this post called Managing Data Mart Changes, there's a couple of diagrams that are quite helpful. This first one here, you can see that when we initially deploy in this 3 life cycle scenario, we can create all of our assets here, our component packages, and just simply copy those packages from one environment to another without rebuilding them. But the configuration, you can see, is built for each of the 3 different environments. So this is an example of an initial deployment. In other words, there's nothing in test or production at the time that we deploy. Now, once we do deploy into test and production, we'll need to do some other things to make sure that we don't lose data as we're building, and we'll also have to manage changes a little differently. So the same thing applies for development. We're going to just deploy all packages to our development lifecycle and create a configuration. In fact, we'll create a configuration still for each of the 3 different life cycles. But when we get to the test lifecycle, we want to make sure that our test system is in sync with production before we promote to production. So that's what we're doing here. We're saying copy our production database, which already has data in it, to our test system and run all of our component packages against that test system. If that passes, then we can deploy our component packages to production, as well as any additional database diff alter scripts that we might need to apply. So take a look at this post. It provides a lot more details about how you can manage this. There's also quite a few different ways to automate the build process, but this post should help you get started. Okay, that's about all there is to building and deploying. We'll see you in the next course.